a nice Eid and you're all out of your food comas and back to the summers that are upon us. We have Kamna Patel here, right in the other screen next to me, although not physically, sadly. But Kamna and I actually met last year when we were having a little pop-up library session of the offset pitara at Goa Photo. And we met to kind of do a series of what turned out to be a series of workshops and conversations later in the year and earlier this year. And that's when I also came across this book that she had made with her own imprint called Editions Jojo, which we'll be talking about a little later as well. Just wanted to welcome you all. Welcome to the Guftgu series at Offset Projects. And just to give a small introduction to the few people who I haven't seen here before. Hi. Offset is, I'm Anchika Varma. I'm a photographer and I also run the initiative called Offset. We're actually, with the initiative, what we try and do is really work with experimenting with the book form, whether it is photography, whether it's paper making, whether it's artist books, sometimes all of them put into one as well. And the idea is to kind of try and see how books can help us communicate outside of our circles. So like, let's say if you're a photographer, how can you communicate with your book outside of photographers? Because usually people tend to get into their own bubbles. And the way that I think about it is, can you imagine if only writers read literary books? It would be so terribly sad. So why should only artists have access to artist books? Because at the end of the day, what we want to talk about is for everybody, right? So it's just with that idea that we organize a whole bunch of workshops. We have a residency program, which is currently in limbo this year because this was supposed to be our residency month, and clearly that has not been possible. But hopefully things are going to get better slowly. And so we also do a bunch of artist talks, panel discussions under Guftgu. For those of you who don't know, Guftgu is an Urdu Persian word that actually means conversations, intimate, candid, casual conversations. And although we've been doing these more being physically present, I think the COVID scenario allowed us a situation to expand those conversations across regions and geographies, and maybe hopefully have audiences that are also outside of Delhi and India to a certain degree. So we thought, let's try and make the best of it. I think we can start now, right, Kamna? Should we begin?
Yeah, whatever you
Cool, awesome. Then let's do this. So just to kind of give you a small background maybe on Kamna. Kamna is a photographer, but also an artist in her own right. She's an author of multiple books by now, I should say, some of which have been realized and are available in the market as well across India and outside, and some that will be out very soon. So we'll be talking to her about all of these books, but we'll start with something that she's been working on for a while now. Maybe it was probably the first dummy in some ways that you made, Kamna. Would I be right in saying that?
No, actually, it was maybe the third dummy that I've ever made. But I guess it started quite a long time ago. So I think I began the process of photographing around the house sometime in 2015.
Okay.
When I moved back to Bombay, and I think the dummy may have sort of materialized a couple of years later, maybe 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
2.5 years ago. Yeah.
And I know that earlier this year, you also was it earlier this year or late last year? Sorry, I'm losing track of time. When you actually went for a Japanese binding training session. work series of workshops, or you were working with a binder in Japan to learn their techniques as well?
I was in Japan for work, and while on my days off, basically on the weekends or whenever I had time off, I did a couple of sessions with binders in Japan. So two different teachers. So there were, I think, three sessions in total.
Okay.
Yeah,
And how was that?
that was, I mean, two out of those three sessions were really amazing because there are certain things that he had earned just by experience, and I think to watch him work and working so intuitively, and just where like measurements are no longer about the millimeter but more about how they logically work within the form of a book was something that kind of reassured me a little bit. So it
Right.
was a really nice style to watch and to learn, and I really hope that I can go back and spend a lot more time there and just work on learning more techniques from him.
I hope we're able to see that soon enough.
I hope
So
so.
what we're gonna do is actually, I'm gonna probably dive right into it. And maybe what we can do is start with showing you guys a video of Kamna's current dummy in process. It's a book called Dori. And I think before we say anything about it, maybe you can see this video of the book, and then I'll run a PDF of it as well, so that Kamna can take us through it. This is
Or maybe I can take you through it while the video is running, since
sure.
it's
That
not
sounds
that
like a
long,
good
and then
plan
we
too.
can.
Yeah, I'm just gonna share my screen, and Kamna, when you let me know if you can see it, then I'll kind of. Can you see the VLC player?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm just gonna start playing this now. Do you want to talk us through what the idea behind the book was, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So I basically, like I said, I began photographing around the house. Recording conversations with my grandparents somewhere around 2015 when I moved back to Bombay. And the impulse, I guess, came from a need to make sense of my relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the process of this recording was a great excuse or a mediator for this, because growing up, there was always this dissonance between what my personality was turning into and what they expected of me. And needless to say, it was a cause for a lot of anxiety. But simply because we belong to two very different times in India, right? And I should probably also add that my father was a boomer who died when I was around 5, and so I think that generational bridge was kind of broken in a way. But I mean, anyway, what started off as I guess a reason for introspection took me on a journey into their past and into questions that questions about love, about morals, about duty, about family, about joint families, about identity within these units, about economic and social dependencies. And I think that this just opened up a host of questions which in trying to understand, I kind of found my position as well, either in symbiosis with or in contrast to.
Mm-hmm.
And as the edges started to come together as a story, it took many shapes over time before it actually reached the form of the dummy that you're looking at right now.
Right.
And I mean, the decision to actually make a book out of these images actually, I think, sort of happened while I was in Vipassana 2 years ago. And I think I was really stuck with this work for a long time because I didn't really know where to go with it. And like I think the push came from the fact that I wanted done in time for my grandmother's birthday, which is actually tomorrow. So I guess I think 2 years ago this time I was, or a little before, I was in Vipassana. And but that never happened. But I did eventually get it done in time for like my grandfather's birthday in September. But it was a really simple book dummy. Like it was literally printed on paper and hand stitched. While with me looking at YouTube tutorials on how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, I did also send it in for a grant application that year, which I didn't
Right.
get, and so I sat on it for an even longer time, still unsure of whether this was a story that should go beyond my family or not.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, I showed it during a workshop that I participated in with Valentina Abhinavudi in Hyderabad.
Right.
which the 13 Jara collective had organized, this year. And
Cool.
so her and the group gave me a lot of constructive feedback and criticism, and the form that you just saw was basically a result of that workshop in a way. And I sent this dummy to the Castle Awards in 2019, and it was shortlisted.
Right.
But this is also the first time I kind of rely on narrative devices that are so rooted in realism. So it's really a departure from the language that I'm otherwise used to.
Right.
But
So, I mean, maybe what we can also do is that I'm going to try and also share the PDF. And while we have the PDF running, maybe we can then start talking a little bit about the process as well, because I know that this book has, I mean, although right now we're seeing it in something that's a much more final, closer to the final form, maybe as opposed to when you started a few years ago. But
that only time will tell.
I mean, we don't know when it will get to its actual final stage,
Yeah.
but maybe at this point, it might also be nice to also understand how, in so many ways, I mean, and this is of course an assumption on my side, but how the process of arriving at the final stage of this book has also been a lot about your own growth and maybe more questions that have come into place for you as well. And I think that might be really interesting to kind of get into. Sorry, just one sec. I'll just share the screen. Uh, can you see this? Is this fine, Kamna?
Yeah, but maybe you should do a single page view so you don't, because
Okay,
they're not
I'll just,
actually, you know.
yeah. Sorry, today I'm actually not functioning out of my, what do you say, desktop. So there are little adaptations I'm having to do out of my laptop as well. But if I go full screen, is this better?
Yeah, it works for me.
Okay, perfect. So, I mean, so one of the things that I wanted to start about is actually, like you mentioned, that this is something that you've kind of been working on uh, for a few years. And over a period of time, the book in itself has taken different forms. It's worked through different sizes, it's worked through different formats. And I mean, I noticed in the video version, which is not the final current version. Let's not say final anymore. Let's just say current version. But I mean, there's a separation even from size and format even within that. But I think I want to I want to track back even more and talk about like how for you the project was also maybe an inquiry into love, and what it means to have that sense of companionship and love, and maybe how you look at it as opposed to like how you see it in your grandparents. I mean, I remember we spoke about it very briefly earlier this year, and I just thought it's something that would be really beautiful to share with our audience today as well.
Sure. I mean, I think, uh, when you sort of grow up in I would say our generation, with a certain, it's opportunity for learning and sort of broadening your horizons a little bit. This idea of a partnership for, like, an arranged marriage, or at least to me, a partnership for the sake of a partnership never made sense. But when I looked at my grandparents, I mean, they've been together since they were 3 and 5 years old, and they are now 90, 94, 96 years old, or 95 and 97 years old. But then, I mean, the more I kind of thought it and read into it, and but then the ultimate goal, I guess, was commitment and togetherness. There was no option for, first finding this passion and then, learning complicity and then going into commitment. So the way I think their relationship was shaped also was dictated by the society that they were born in, the time that they were born in, and I mean, within like the construct of a Hindu joint family, which to me was, and which is also why that dissonance exists, because I think by the time I was growing up, my ideology was already being shaped in like a more modern India, so to speak.
Right.
And so, yeah, just trying to understand. I mean, now at this point, what is their relationship really about? What is it? What is their function for each other? When does that intimacy or that love, so to speak, show, and when doesn't it show, and when is it appropriate for it to be expressed, and when not? And these are things that change or that depending on in culture to culture and generation to generation as well, I suppose.
Right. And I think, I mean, one of the things that ends up happening, actually, maybe I'll go back to the previous page, uh, is that I think very often when we kind of come with, like our relatively more modern ideas of love and social structures, the immediate response is also to negate the actions of a particular system. Not to say that one should support, but, but we end up kind of making kind of pre-decisions based on what we have assumed is right or wrong, and kind of make judgments on it. Do you feel that, I mean, did you feel that you probably started at that stage and then had to maybe break your own assumptions to a certain degree with that form?
Yeah, I mean, I may have started with rejecting it just because perhaps I felt that it was something that was expected of me.
Right.
Uh, which I mean, realistically, it was never in like said explicitly, but
Right. But
just
we also
as
internalize so much of this, right? Like sometimes, even
yeah.
though these things are not expected necessarily, you kind of jump to the defense just as
And when you question the system, I mean, when you question the whole idea of marriage and partnership, and when you come to your own conclusions of what's right for you, you may not agree with certain sets of values that is right for other people. But having said that, you know, marriages for convenience or arranged marriages sometimes last much longer than marriages that are built on passionate love, because the ultimate goal is already something more than just a physical attraction. And
right.
and the way love, I think, evolves and manifests in those relationships happens in a very different way. Sometimes it can happen over a longer period of time. I mean, and it again depends on how, whether the relationship has a short-term goal or a long-term goal. Um, I think the avatar of love changes based on
Right.
that.
Right. Right.
Um,
And
so yeah, I mean, it's not a judgment really. It's just
it's realizing that maybe we can't really make judgments in some ways, I guess.
yeah. I mean, there are just so many different ways to,
Right.
to do things and to live in a way that's suitable for us.
And I mean,
But
some ways this is kind of like the interesting bit about having, and I mean, I usually hate to use the word project, but for lack of a better word that's come up until now, I mean, to have these projects that are more kind of, as much as they are about the other, they're also about yourself, and they're also about kind of understanding where you come from, and maybe breaking down who we are for ourselves as well to a certain degree. uh,
yeah, but I mean, I think anything you do in that sense is kind of like it's just something you do. It's a practice, it's a performance, and I feel that especially for photography is like that performative aspect is so strong. And
hmm,
also, if like at least for me, I think that practicing any art form or any creative form is first about some kind of understanding for yourself, or some kind of, I guess, a
hmm,
spiritual um, development.
right.
And like I think that that can only come from just like experiencing everything around you and using your immediate environment in a way to understand your position in this world. That I don't need to sound too spacey or like,
No, I don't think
that's just
so.
how
I don't think it's spacey at all. It's quite beautiful, actually.
because
I
I'm not a political person, even though the in today's news is probably the most political work I've done so far, but it wasn't intentionally so. Like it was initially, it started off again in Valentina's workshop just as Instagram stories to help me make sense, like just as an exercise. and it kind of made me understand my own political biases, and it just kind of went in that direction.
Right. So, I mean, I think what we can maybe do is just, I just wanted to add a couple more things on Dori is that I know that, I mean, so why I was actually talking about this whole process of kind of even self-questioning and getting to understand the relationship dynamics that you wanted to express, through the book. I know that it's gone through, like, I mean, through various avatars over the years as well, and I mean, whether it is in the type of content that might have gone into it, to the edits that you have changed, to even the sizes that you have played with, and you kind of maybe, I mean, what I was curious to know is that what kind of helped dictate these choices for you? Because I know it's not that, I mean, it's not that you kind of had this massive team of, you had a designer or an editor or a publisher to work with you through this. You were in many ways your own designer, your own editor, not your own publisher yet, and we'll get into that too. But what were the kind of dynamics that dictated these changes? Was it out of the result of the conversations that are from the book itself?
I think it's a number of things. I mean, the process of putting the book together itself, because it relies so much on realism as the approach that I guess chose consciously or subconsciously for the subject. I immediately thought of like documentary films, and so when I was putting the book together, that was my sort of reference of like, so like if you see the beginning of the PDF, the archive images, which in this PDF are just placeholders, by the way. I'm
Right.
still working on the archive section, so that's just like a reference.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to add, guys, I know we've seen a video and a PDF, but neither of these are final stages of the book. We're actually showing them to you just to get, for you guys to get a sense of like how they're different versions of it. I think the PDF you mentioned, Kamna, is much smaller in size from the video book form that we saw, right?
Right. So, I mean, it is evolving both in form and edit. So the video that you saw, I mean, the idea of a documentary film is kind of still strong in the way I've structured, in the sequencing. So like the beginning images, which is kind of like the flutter film, and
It's like
the sound is being,
that's
that's just starting the films, and even the dialogue is like a voiceover, like a non-diegetic sound, and at the end you have my voice kind of explaining, but contextual. So, and that stays in the second form, in the current form. Although I have made the book smaller, because I actually showed it to Asmita as well in the current form that it's in. You saw the video, and she gave me some good feedback as well, and she kind of pointed out that it is so intimate, and the images are so close in that you need such a big form for it, and you can have it smaller, and people will then have it closer to them when they're looking at it or further away. But because I'm so close in, I don't need to blow it up to space. Since it's such an intimate subject, it makes sense to make it smaller. But also, in the current PDF, I've changed it all to be landscape, because initially I wanted it also to be, this performance that happens with the reader as well. So it implicates the reader, the performance of like the story.
Sorry, your voice is echoing and kind of going in and out a bit. I just kind of a little bit of a lag. I don't mean to interrupt you on that, but
can you hear me now?
Yeah. I think you moved your phone a little.
I mean, my phone closer to the window,
which is perfect. We let it be there. Thanks. Sorry, to come back to Sorry.
What was I saying? Oh yeah, so I moved everything around to landscape. Yeah, so I moved it to landscape because I wanted this performative aspect, but I realized it was really annoying, and I mean it was just not working with that size even, and so I moved it into all landscape, and I think it reads a lot better now. Plus, if it's smaller in terms of like publishing and shipping, it will be A, cheaper to produce, and B, cheaper to ship, and these are very real concerns I think when we're making
This is the
work
publisher
anymore.
in you talking now.
With the potential of publishing it myself and having to deal with shipping and selling
Right,
and all of that, I was like, maybe it's just
right.
small. The small format works across all of the
Right. I mean,
platforms.
I remember we discussed this whole bulkiness and almost formality of the previous book form in earlier this year in Jaipur, if I'm not mistaken, when I've seen the book. And I mean, it's interesting to see also how, you know, as an author, but as a photographer, you know, while those roles are being played, a lot of how you think of the final book form is also coming in, knowing some of the aspects of publishing that come into play, things like shipping, things like printing, the economies of what sizes how different sizes function. And um, and I think, I mean, one of the things I wanted to talk about over here is that I actually really appreciate the presence of actual physical dummies to understand these processes, both as bookmakers, as authors, or even as publishers, let's say. And I think, I mean, over a period of time, we've started making these digital books so much. We've kind of sat down to understand our InDesign, but and it kind of sometimes just these digital book formats don't allow you to understand the dynamics of the medium itself. You know, I mean, I feel like somewhere in that digitization, what ends up happening is that that the book ends up becoming like a platform. It's like a website. So you end up kind of just working on, okay, front and back pages. Whereas in the actual production of a dummy, no matter how rudimentary that form may be, maybe it's actually just, um, you know, sheets of like printer paper on which you've actually just pasted a literal home printer version. um, Photographs can sometimes still help you understand the different communications that can happen when the book itself becomes a language, the book itself becomes a medium, you know. And I know that, Kamna, you've been also working on physical dummies, you know, to a certain degree with every different stage of the book form, whether it is Dori or apparitions, or, you know, even in today's news, which actually kind of started as a physical form itself. You know, because
Actually, that started as Instagram stories, and then it
Instagram stories. Yeah,
became a
actually,
book.
yeah, that might be interesting because we're
So it
talking
was
about a
inverse.
completely digital format in which you kind of started. And maybe, yeah, I mean, maybe we can also talk about that both in the context of in today's news, which is interesting because, like you said, it's something that started with Instagram stories, and maybe Dori and your leading into your current work as well.
Yeah, I mean, with Dori, it's like what you said, it's gone through so many stages. And I'm pretty sure that once this PDF is done, I'll probably go and make another dummy and see if the size works, if the thickness works. I still haven't fully decided what paper I'm using, but
Right.
things like this, at least for me, I don't have that, like, the, the capital of that design information at the tips of my fingers, because A, I'm not trained in design, and I think these are things that come with experience, and so I need to see it. And I think that I can also speak for a lot of designers with experience, perhaps, who also feel the same way, that they might be able to visualize it, but they have to look at it before they make a decision. Because once it goes on the press, if there's anything wrong, you're going to be miserable as somebody making it, because you put in so much money, and you know, it's like one small oversight that you didn't pay attention to. And so I think it is important to see it physically.
Yeah. I mean, usually I think,
And
I don't know outside, but like of the few photographers, I know the actual physical dummy happens because it's like, oh my God, all like the photo awards and photo grants are like going to happen in the next 2 weeks is the deadline. So suddenly there'll be like an emergency at like the regular haunts of like the Delhi printing presses who are just belting out dummies one after the other to put like directly into almost courier boxes to send it off, you know. And then invariably these dummies come back and people are like, you know, actually, maybe I wouldn't print it like this if I actually had to. Maybe I would have changed it. And I
yeah,
mean, you have you gone through those scenarios or?
yeah, tons. I mean, for this one, for example, you saw the video, you can see the size actually now. It's quite
Right.
bulky. This binding does not work at all for the bulk of the book. It's really difficult to kind of handle.
Hmm.
But what did come out of this was the embroidery titling. I realized that you can do it, and there are people in Mumbai or in India actually anyway who would be willing to do it. But like, so this initially, these edges were black, and I made the
Ah.
dummy, and again for this competition, for this whatever, for the dummy awards, and
Right.
it was black. And then I realized while turning the pages that like as you touch it, the black kind of comes off because it's ink. So it was tinted
Right.
black on white paper, which is why I kind of chose this yellow, which is also part of
A warmer.
the color palette of the book as well. And it's also light enough that even if it does hit the edges, it doesn't really hurt. And I actually lifted that from this book called A Criminal Investigation. It's a similar design. They also
Okay.
have like a
A
sort of
completely different content and
yeah.
context,
But
but it
I feel
works
like
beautifully for this as well.
yeah, I mean it solved my problem for at least the turning of the pages.
Right. And your
Um,
first version of Dory was a completely handmade, hand stitched
yeah,
version that you could just give to your grandparents as a
my
gift.
grandparents. And it was like also a lot more images from the archive that were kind of interspersed with images that I had made around the house. And
Right.
eventually that got kind of cleaned up, and the archive images came to the front, and um, the
So it
rest of
led
the
to two
story.
books, I would say, because in some ways, like I think the handmade version has a different audience, like which would be actually your grandparents, and so for them that single edition of that book is probably what they would value even more, because that whole idea of memory and nostalgia and to see each other together would have probably been uh, more relevant to them than the
Yeah,
second
and even
version.
just
I don't know.
for them to look at the pictures of them young in that context. Initially they were like, "What is this?" And then they were like, "Wait, when have you been doing this?" And then they were like, "Who is that? Is that me? Is that us?" And it was just I don't know. It was I guess something to share
Right.
with them as a way in a way.
And I mean,
Moments.
apart from the book form, I also wanted to know maybe the reasons to a certain degree, because I know for this particular book you're more keen to not to have an outside publisher, right?
Uh, uh, I mean, I'm still grappling with that. Um,
Okay.
I don't know yet. I think maybe that would be ideal because I feel like I'm too close to the subject, and I can only take it this far. But if I have to make it like about something more universal, then I think I'll be stuck in some places. Plus, in terms of like, I feel like it'll be really expensive to produce this book the way I want to do it.
Okay.
Um, and so I think that if I have publishing and distribution help, maybe this will help me tell the story in the way that it should be told. It will reach a wider audience, and yeah, feel. I
Like it
mean, I'm
might.
not, I'm not, I'm not like close to the idea of self-publishing. Whichever happens first, I guess. If I get the funds, if I manage to save the funds
Right.
before I find a publisher, then
Then why not go with that way?
yeah.
And I mean, so just to kind of also touch upon you as a publisher and a self-publisher at the same time, I want to kind of talk a little bit about Editions Jojo, which is your own imprint, under which I know in today's news was published under that imprint itself. And can you talk about like what led you to the idea of, I mean, a lot of photographers today are self-publishing, right? They make their own books, and they go with like singular books that are self-published. But you've also chosen to kind of keep an imprint that would, uh, I mean, of course, publish a few of your books, but also expand into publishing other formats of books as well. Uh, but it's come with a different idea, right? Like it's more about a tone that you wanted to set within certain forms of books and certain content. And I think it'd be really nice to share what led you to say, okay, I'll self-publish, but I'll also have this imprint.
I think initially it also started because I realized that I have different kinds, like different directions that my work is going in. One is Dori, and maybe closer to Dori would be Preludes, which was my first ever project. And then the rest of the works are leaning towards a language that is more like in today's news, or seen as terrorism or contact, which are um, more abstract, less sort of being rooted in a realistic or a documentary perspective, like a traditional documentary perspective anyway.
Right.
And so I kind of thought that it just also as a reminder for me as to what I'm kind of focusing on in works that come under Jojo, and just as a reference point to keep going back to, I thought it would be nice to have a different entity. Plus, also as a self-publisher, um, I just thought it would be easier to consolidate that practice within a different kind of identity, and not have it so close to my name or me personally, and maybe that will open it up to different possibilities. Why self-publishing? Um, I think I just found it easier to design and publish and distribute my own book than try and get meetings with publishers, to be perfectly honest. And I had some savings, and I knew, for at least for in today's news, more or less where it was going. So I just kind of, it was literally on a whim,
Right.
and it just happened like that. And I think it's just flowing in some direction. It seems like a good direction as for now. So why not?
Right. Yeah. No, definitely. And also in today's news, um, I mean, apart from its connection to the context of how the book, what the book talks about as well, but I know it was also, uh, it was a truly indie exercise in that sense, because I know that you actually got in touch with local printers, local binders, different kind of craft and skill people, but at a very local level, and try to also integrate them to also encourage people to to access these professionals even more. And I know that you've also been kind of helping out, like with the workshop that we did earlier this year. You were also really open to say, hey, if this is what you're thinking, this guy is great for publishing in Bombay. This guy is a really good binder. This guy can get your thread right in this kind of a way. And so it's also become kind of also looking at local resources rather than this larger idea of, okay, if I'm going to make this book, I'm going to like take it to the top guy. But like sometimes what you want to do is more experimental, which is also what Jojo's kind of looking at. And it's interesting then that Dori is something that you're also looking at for an outside publisher to come in, because in some ways your work in Dori is so different from everything else that you've kind of been working on. Dori's much quieter, a lot more reflective, a slower pace, maybe a lot more subtle connections are being made. Whereas in today's news, apparitions to a certain degree, and maybe we can briefly touch upon contact as well. They the visual language in that is very different too, uh, right? I think you
Yeah,
close for a
I
second.
mean, with Jojo, I think I was also interested in kind of this cusp between the documentary possibilities of photography and its ability to move into a larger and less sort of direct way of communicating or representing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that again for me that also stems from experimentations with the medium and the various forms of capture that can happen in our present times, where you have screenshots, you have images that are being thrown at you every second you look around at anything. You have surveillance. There's just so many possibilities of engaging with images that to me seem like they are more indicative of a truth or of a documentation of something than an image that says, look at this, this is reality. And
Right.
I think that's why also with Dori realism, I have tried to remind either myself or whoever's looking at it in certain, like using certain tropes, like, I don't know, for example, the scans, I've left the dust on it. The fact that it goes between black and white and color, little images like where the lens cap is in the frame, or there's a photograph that's in the frame. It's just a little reminder that these are representations, they are images, and they are representative of a bias of a granddaughter's relationship with her grandparents. but also of a photographer's relationship with a subject, because there are all these different things happening at the same time. So in that, I guess, way of thinking, Jojo and Dori are tied together.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not in the way that the works are represented.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And I mean, but Jojo,
No.
I'm still exploring this, idea of documentary without actually having to directly represent. And I think in today's news for me was that, where these images were bringing to my head, or the association of these images were bringing to my mind certain things that were realities to me growing up as a woman in India,
Mm-hmm.
which were not at all represented in the news. Like,
Right.
they were, I mean, like what I was seeing in these images was, or what it was triggering for me, had nothing to do with the stories that were actually being told. And I think I was trying to extract my own understanding of what it means like to be a woman in India, how women are represented in popular media, and how it's very much controlled by patriarchal forces.
Right. What I'm
And I
going
think
to
it
do
is
is
still a
actually,
documentation.
sorry, I'm just going to play a small video of In Today's News so that for the people who are listening to us and haven't seen the book previously, they can kind of get a sense of what the work is. This book, In Today's News, is actually, it was published by Editions Jojo last year itself, I think, right? 2019 is when it came into being. Um, I I mean, I'll also talk about like some other observations mostly, and, and you can respond to them. But I think this will also kind of, to a certain degree, express the kind of experimentation that Kamna is talking about within the documentative format. Um, Kamna, can you see my full screen with the video?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I'm just going to play this. And I mean, one of the things that actually, which I would want to maybe quickly touch upon right at the beginning, is how like this baggage of the photo book being a result of like a deep, long engagement in the physical form, and how actually this work was I mean, can you talk about the timeline that it happened in? Just because I think sometimes we kind of create preconditions to book formats that need to be shaken up a little bit.
So this, I mean, this is a really, really good project. I think the whole thing, from the first Instagram story to the publishing of the book and the growth of Jojo, happened in like 4 months.
Right.
It was a very like quick kind of subconscious way of working. And by the time I realized that I had all these images, then I kind of went back and was a little more organized in the way I was collecting them as well.
Right.
But yeah, I think that the edit and the sequencing happened. I think I made like 2 or 3 versions of it, and then this was the final version. And in terms of production, it took me like a month, and I knew I wanted to have it cheap because it was somewhere between a zine and a book,
Mm-hmm.
just also because of the nature of the subject,
Right.
um, and because I wanted to have it locally produced. And it was also something I was exploring in Bombay in terms of like what is possible in terms of production here, and how low can I bring the cost from working with local producers, but also what, what are the materials available to me. And so the entire book was made in between Bora Bazaar in Fort and Comart in Prabhadevi. And I know a lot of people live when I say Comart. What? It's true. Comart has been an incredible support, and they've just, like, the guys there have been so open to experimentation. And even this dummy was made at Comart actually. And yeah, so like in Bora Bazaar, you have so many printers that are offset printers, and they're just like kind of little holes in the wall with like machines in the back. And I found one there called EJ Printers. And it's amazing because Bora Bazaar, you have your printers, and then you walk down the road, you have paper suppliers, so you can go and choose your papers, or you can choose your covers if you wanted to. When you come back to the printer, you make like then deliver it to the printer, entire stock. Because obviously I don't know how to calculate how many sheets I needed, so the printer had to be
Right.
required. And so the paper like shop just delivers the paper, and then across the road diagonally there's the binder. The binderji will come, and binderji will say, "This is possible. This is not possible. Madam, you're really annoying. This I can't do this." Or, "Madam, that's awesome. I can do this." And so like this collaboration with, I mean, I won't say that it was the most like seamless way of producing something. It was very much jugaad, in the best sense of the word. But it worked, and it was so much fun. And I think that with Jojo also, I'm very clear that I want everything that comes out of there to contribute to the production of books in India, and kind of use it as an excuse to also build up our resources through research and training and experimenting. And because I think photo books are an import, right? It's not something that
Right.
that that is local, like that's indigenous in our photographic practice. Well, I mean, neither is photography, but I guess photo books are an import. But we do have our own history of making books in India, and I don't know. I'd like to explore both sides of this.
Right. Thanks for that. I mean, one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and maybe we can expand on this a little bit. I know we're probably gonna go a little over 7, guys. I hope you don't mind. But you can also keep sending in your questions so that I know that if there are any, I'll time myself accordingly and kind of move around based on that. But I mean, one of the things that I did want to talk about in context to in today's news was how image appropriation is kind of functioning today, and more importantly, how as photographers or as people involved within the visual photo world are kind of looking and re-looking at archives, and in some ways, I mean, not in some ways, but your book is kind of that. It's kind of a reinterpretation of in some forms what I consider a public archive, because most of the images are taken from newspapers and magazines that you were encountering during the 1 week of the workshop that you, not 1 week, I'm sorry, 10 days or 1 week, am I right on that timeline when it started for Valentine?
It was 4 days, yeah. But
Okay.
I mean, this was yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of what triggered it off, right? And then it kind of expanded obviously into a longer timeline. But so I mean, maybe it would be interesting to see how your gendered reading kind of works into an appropriation of an archive that otherwise does not necessarily have a focus or an agenda as such, maybe a different kind of an agenda, let's just say.
I think like when you're working with images, regardless of what the archive is, they archives in general, I believe, are open to readings depending on who is accessing it, and
Mm-hmm.
who is kind of uh, making what meaning out of it. And images themselves are, I think, their meaning depends on the context that they're seen in, but also on the, I guess, our cultural understandings of what these images are trying to signify. And so I think for me, newspaper images are something that I'm just familiar with, especially newspapers in India. And these are images you see growing up all the time. You know, it's whether it's, I don't know, like a Hero Honda ad, or whether it's images of women protesting outside a bank, or there's, I mean, all the different representations, I guess, folders for meaning that culturally we usually take it for granted. Um, During this exercise, I think I was just looking at them purely visually, and thinking of Instagram stories as an editing tool. And that's kind of how I started to play with it. And eventually, I think I realized that it was not just the visual associations were also kind of making me put meaning to these sequences, whether they made sense to anybody else or not. And so, in the final book form, I think I thought about both my reading and also a potential reading of a video when I chose the final images. In terms of interpreting an archive, I don't know. I wasn't actually thinking of that initially when I started the book, but it's true that, I mean, as archives become accessible to people, you know, they have every right to their own meanings from it and use it to tell their own stories.
Right. Sorry, I know we're getting some questions, so I'm going to try and put them in as we go along. I know Naman has a question, and I think this is something more connected to Dori, although he hasn't mentioned it specifically. But he wanted to know: do you take all these shots on film, or or have you done post processing to give it that kind of a look? Uh, because it
So
looks very pure and aesthetic.
they are actually, there has been no one way that I've shot these images. It's literally whatever I had in my hand in the day. So I think like Dori was quite a visceral response to being in that space. So sometimes it was from my phone, sometimes it was from, if I had my camera on me, I'd use my camera. Sometimes I would borrow my mother's phone or my brother's phone, and like because I would have not brought my phone to go and visit them, and shoot with that, and then like have them upload it to a drive and send it to me. So it was like a bunch of, I mean, whatever I could find really, and then I processed them to look like that. So I think my color palette, I kind of processed it in a way that reminded me of their room, because their room, a lot of these pastel greens and yellows, as you might really see in the
Right.
images.
So I mean, and this decision to kind of keep keep a consistency. I mean, the idea of post processing came in because you wanted kind of a visual consistency, I guess, through the book. So, I mean, do you think like, I mean, what would you think would have been problematic, let's say, if they were in that varied format? Do you think it would have affected readability? I mean, I'm just asking this because I know a few of the panelists who've come in are actually much newer into the practice, and I think it might be just really nice for them to get a sense of how you're thinking about it, not just from the act of like what images we take in the edit, but how we choose to edit for a book, maybe, which is different to, let's say, if was an exhibition, maybe, you know, they could have been different formats presenting different visual aesthetics as well.
I think like the processing for me was a way of also kind of cutting down the noise. Otherwise, there would just be, it would be like a bazaar. And so it's a, it's a decision that I took in that sense, where I think the noisier images also I kind of put into black and white, and then left ones that, the colored ones that made sense in the sequence as well in color. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Tamujit actually wanted to know, how do you decide on the edition size of a book?
I think it depends on the cost of production and the responsibility you are willing to take on selling the books. So my like apparitions was an edition of 50, because I had very low confidence that I would sell more than 50 books. And I think I was a little more confident with in today's news. And
Right.
so I made an edition of 300. But yeah, I think it depends on budget, also the process you're using. Like if you're using an offset process, what I've learned is that anything under 300 books makes no sense, and between 300 to 500 is a good number if you're using offset. If you're using digital, the economies of scale don't apply, so you can make as many as you feel. And by digital, I mean like either a digital offset or an indigo process.
Mm-hmm.
You can make as many as you feel comfortable, knowing that you can sell them, or you produce them as you go, and it can be an open edition and you don't
Right.
really need to.
And then you can also have something like, I know a lot of photographers do a system which is called like a print on demand system. So you actually, you define that, okay, fine, I'm going to make 300 copies of this, but I might not have the funds right now to print out all 300 in one go. So they'll choose to kind of do a digital offset and then say, okay, great. So it's a print on demand. If you request, if you kind of make a payment for a book, then I'll immediately get it printed and then send it off, which is something that's possible in a digital format, but is not
Right.
actually possible in an offset format. So those are also, I think, just some of the concerns that, some of the factors that, come into play. Preksha, sorry, I know I'm kind of jumping in and out of conversations, but I
That's
just thought
totally
since there are
fine.
questions, we'll also take them in. Preksha Kothari also wanted to know, how do you choose, shortlist and sequence your photographs? I mean, actually, it might be interesting to know how that process happened for a book like In Today's News as opposed to a book like Dori, as opposed to a book like Apparitions, which we haven't seen yet, but
It's
I want to
okay.
show that to you guys really quickly. Right. I mean, maybe if you think it has a connection, I can show that uh, while you
Well,
talk about the
yeah,
sequencing.
sure.
You know?
Uh, I think like I go both on feeling and visual connections. Also, like for me, sequencing and editing is very much influenced by the music I'm listening to at the time. So, for Dori, for example, I was listening to like it's like a minimalist composer music, and the track was music for 18 musicians, Misty, right? And that kind of really influenced the repetitions and like
Sorry. Hmm.
I think the way the sequencing in the second part happened at least. Um, for in today's news, it was again. Should I listen to in today's news? Maybe I'm not so influenced by music I'm listening to. Maybe it was just Dori. But for in today's news, it was just a lot of back and forth. I made a bunch of prints and I just laid them out, and I was kind of making sequences and moving them around and seeing what works with what.
Sorry, I think there is
And
some audio that's coming in and I'm not able to. Can you hear this audio? Or is it just me?
just
It seems like this is the lowest music I can put this video on. Sorry. But I mean, what would be
um,
interesting is also Apparitions and Dori is in some ways kind of talking about family, talking about relationships. Um, Maybe if you can kind of give a little introduction to Apparition and talk about how, for you, for your thinking process, the sequence of how the books were made, or I mean, are still being made, because I know both of these are in uh, process right now. So within the
Actually,
same,
Apparitions was published in 2014,
this was the
and
first
um,
one that was there, right?
yeah. And so with Apparitions, again, like it depends on I mean, this is this cover, and again,
Go a
like this is
little
something
back so people can
you
also
can
visualize. Yeah,
produce
thanks.
in. So I made it with this. I had this cover made in Dharavi where they also do this like a font embroidery, and I mean it was all made like again digital and this little string. It's I think it depends also. I mean, it might be the same, a similar subject, but also the context was completely different, and the relationship that I was documenting in Apparitions very different from the relationship I was in or documenting in Dori. In Apparitions, it was my relationship with my family over an internet connection while I was in an environment that was completely alien from my own culture, from my own norms that I grew up around, and it kind of yeah, I was looking at my relationship with them through being in that place, but also the fact that it's a relationship that exists online, and it's something that like these screenshots are trying to save moments that are happening across time, across space within a certain like within real time and way. So in that sense, I think the approach worked for it. In terms of format, again, I don't like it. It was a, I mean, I was approaching it again as like a small, affordable object. I love small books. I still haven't figured out why, but it's just my first
I
instinct.
have a soft spot
And
for the smaller books as well, so
it's just
I'm not even
I
going
can
to say things
handle.
otherwise. No, definitely. And I mean, and it's also like, I think, I mean, why I just wanted to quickly touch upon Apparitions is because it's kind of like a scenario that many of us are facing more and more specifically today, because all our relationships seem to have turned virtual, like, I mean, in another world, maybe this is a conversation you and I would be having under a tree while we smoked our cigarettes, but here we are sitting very professionally in front of our computers and kind of having this conversation.
Shirts.
Yeah, I know, having this conversation through an internet format, and suddenly uh, my experience of this conversation and my memory of this conversation is going to be so different from what is it from what it is in like physical form. And so I just wanted to kind of also quickly throw in that little video, because I think for a lot of people
Yeah,
who
yeah.
are here, it, you know, it can echo some thoughts that they might be having. I know a few of the photographers are here are also working on the virtuality of our current lives in that sense. And so
And I think one thing with apparitions was also this idea that, maybe this quality or this digital experience won't be the same. I mean, look at the quality of our internet and our image now as compared
yeah,
to the images you see in apparitions, right? It's already
right.
gone to a much clearer experience in a way. And I don't know, I like it's,
I mean, a
there
few
is
years
a
down the
certain
line, they might be like
a hologram.
a hologram of you that I'm actually
Yeah.
talking to, and you know, vice versa. Who knows what's headed in that
That's
direction?
Yeah, but there is a certain beauty in that aesthetic as well, and it is, I don't know, I found it quite alluding to a lot of like classical ideas of being totally aesthetic in a way. I mean, every time I would see these pixelated screenshots, I would think of like Gerhard Richter and his paintings of images, which were always this like, they kind of look pixelated also.
Right. No, and it's quite interesting because I was talking to someone who's actually studying filmmaking the other day, and I mean, she was studying at this university in the States, and now, of course, with this whole situation, she had to come back home. And actually, Adil was talking to her more than me, and we were kind of discussing, you know, I mean, he was, let's just say, talking to her about like, so what is it like to suddenly continue studying filmmaking on a virtual format, you know, because all schools have kind of moved online. And that kind of got us to talking about how people are actually now making films via applications like Zoom. I know in India we've had a couple of magazines who are now, and internationally, like magazines are now doing photo shoots virtually, where the photographer is actually on the other end of the computer, and kind of directing a shot, you know, in a certain way. So maybe the format and the
And
way that we
maybe
shoot has only expanded into a completely different world as well.
maybe this will be an opportunity to, explore new ways of engaging with these mediums that we are so used to, or engaging with devices that help us tell stories in a visual way. Because I think with limitations, we're almost creative when we have limitations.
Right.
So who knows?
Who knows?
To be ready for the next pandemic.
Just yeah. Just I think we're just ready now. Like just bring it, you know, like we're prepared. We have lived in isolation long enough. Ratul has a question. Um, Ratul wants to know: Do you think archive images have become a major source of image making? And as you're also a bookmaker, how do you think it's affecting the photo bookmaking? Is it a trend now?
I think working with found images has been a trend since like this maybe the 70s. Not so
Yeah,
long.
yeah. I mean, maybe even a little bit before that, but I think popular usage in that sense is kind of probably from the 70s.
Um, but I mean, it is definitely being used more and more since archives have become accessible, more and more accessible. And archives, I mean, like archives of institutions like museums and cultural spaces that have opened up their archives to readings by different people, and it is a way of kind of democratizing a narrative that was initially controlled by institutions. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in that sense, yes, I think as people have had more, easy access to they have been working with it more and more. Trend, maybe it's stemming from a place that we know now that everyone can be a photographer with the fact that we all have cameras, we all have phones, images are constantly being disseminated through technology, through and especially in India, everywhere you look, you have images, and so I think that oversaturation of the medium itself has already given us so much ammo to work with that maybe our language is now being kind of um, shaped by how we can use these images to kind of use the signs or the inherent quality of these images to articulate ourselves. And I think I personally really enjoy looking at existing images
Right.
and seeing how I can manipulate them and kind of use it as a substitute maybe for words even.
Right. No, I think you're so right, and I mean, in fact, our last conversation on the Guftgu format was with an artist called Avni Tanyas, and and we also spoke about this. I mean, although her books have kind of talked more about the reinterpretation of object, but the expression of that has, because it's in the book form, the object becomes the photograph, and a lot of it also had to do with archives in that sense. And I think what's kind of started now is, like you said, institutions. I mean, we were talking about uh, we were trying to be politely critical, maybe, but we were talking about how, like, the act of a museum like the Victorian Albert Museum saying, uh, we will have someone from India come in and access our archives and create a body of work that is a response to that archive. Um, you know, I mean, early it was called I mean, the idea came under the act of relationship building, but at the same time, it came out of a very acute awareness that uh, the archive that they had created was with a particular agenda, and maybe that agenda, the context of that agenda, was negated an entire aspect of the history where that object came from. I mean, also I think people have have started valuing the photograph so much more. You see so much work that's coming out of personal family albums now, which collectively then begin to echo larger narratives in whether it's Indian history, I mean, regional histories or community based histories that were never really spoken about. I mean, even if it's something, let's say on Instagram, there is Brown History. I think that there's that Instagram handle, which is actually like re-looking at this archives, but creating an entire narrative that many people were not accessible to. Or even, one of the books that I really want to talk about at this point is also Photo Circle in Nepal. Has been working through through an archive that they've been building out of collections from institutions and a lot from family archives from the people of Nepal. And they actually made this amazing book which chronicles the entire um, Dalit movement in Nepal. And they were actually able to create this book because suddenly people had realized what their private archives could do as a larger public conversation. And I know that they're currently also working on the feminist movement in Nepal based on similar,
So that,
practices
yeah,
and
yeah.
processes. So there are so many possibilities. I mean, I just kind of wanted to drop that in. There's so many
No, for
possibilities
sure. I
that
mean, even
come in within that.
archives especially that belong to institutions are essentially a source of power, right? That they are
Right.
that the reading that's there, it is to, it is to support and maintain a certain ideology that the institution supports. And by working with these archives and bringing out an alternative reading, you're already reclaiming that and supporting uh, the institutions embracing the action ideology. So yeah.
Right. We have one more question. I don't know the name of the person. It's the alphabet S for now. But they wanted to know, how do you navigate the fine line between paying attention to the material to give a personality to the book and fetishizing the book as an object? When you read a book of literature, what is important is what you read. On the other hand, do you think that sometimes the photo book becomes more about the material aspect than the thread, which is logic, narrative, emotion, that might have pulled it instead?
I think that with an artist's book, every element of the book can be read. So it's very much part of the vocabulary of the book itself. The content is, the body of work is the content, but that body of work will even exist as prints, not necessarily like in a book form. And if you decide to put it in a book form, then every element will contribute to how that story is being perceived consciously or subconsciously by the reader. I believe that. Just like you would pay attention to even a print, for example, if you printed, if you made a print from of an image from the book, you wouldn't just print it on any old paper. You would you would think about why you're using that particular paper and what is the experience of viewing that image on that paper at a particular size in a particular frame. And I think that all of these things differentiate an artistic practice from a literary practice, because the artist kind of has that opportunity to play with more than just the so-called words of their content. Or if you want to say it differently, maybe these are also part of the words of the artist.
Right. Right. No, I mean, totally, I agree with that. I mean, which is why that I guess the paperback pirated versions of the literature books are probably easier and do as well, sometimes even better than the originals. But it's very difficult to do that with artist books. So, and I think what you said, like in terms of the book itself is the work. I think what ends up happening, and it's happening a lot with some younger practitioners as well, is that the book is sometimes taken to be kind of like a portfolio. So what actually you're concentrating on is, okay, so I've got my work, I've created the sequence, and then that sequence is kind of I hate to use the word, but dumped onto a book. And I really wish we had more time, because I know you and I have a lot to talk about on this. But this is how also, like, maybe the edit that you would do to show to someone for a portfolio, or the edit that you would do for an exhibition, often varies drastically to the kind of edit that you might end up having in a book, because it's the book that is the medium itself, and so different elements within it, like Kamna had shown us, the previous book that she made for Dori, which was much bigger in size, but it didn't end up communicating what the feeling that she wanted to kind of put across. And so that changes, and then when that changes, the language within it also is impacted accordingly. So yeah, I think so.
Like Virangana said, it's like a play with time and image
Yeah.
in photo books, and it is. I think that like in Dori, for example, the stretched out sequences that are intercut with the quicker-paced, like quicker-paced sequences, which is also intercut with the voiceovers of the dialogue, and that all determines the pace of the book if you were to read it, in one quick go. But with books, the viewer has or the reader has I think the autonomy to spend as much or as little time as they want with the object. And depending on where they're sitting, what the light is like, where what sounds are around you, what context you're in, your engagement with that object changes, and that's something that you can't control. Whereas in a gallery space, you know the direction you have to walk in, you know that the light is set in a particular way, you know that the experience is controlled to a certain extent, where the reading is very much imposed on you, in at least in a lot of photography shows.
Absolutely. No, definitely. And I mean, I'm curious to know, because this is something that I have been grappling with as I am preparing to print my first book, and also look at some of the projects we've had at Offset, is I mean, I wonder, because the physicality of the book is so integral to the artist book format, and what that might be like in the coming times, because I know that people are slowly moving more and more away from physical. Um, and I mean, in some ways, I guess some forms of bookmaking are always going to continue, like it's like been that eternal conversation about, like, is analog going to go out of photography? And I think that conversation has existed for, I don't know, since as long as I've existed, and yet here we are. I'm practicing analog, you've practiced analog on and off, and um, I mean, it's always on the edge of where we are, these conversations.
Yeah.
And in some ways they do exist. But do you feel that they would, or have you thought about digitizing an artist book, like creating a completely digital PDF format or something?
Yeah, I mean, I have thought of various ways of how you can kind of. I don't think you can replicate that experience, and I don't think there's any sense in replicating that experience,
Exactly.
but definitely interpreting it in a digital space where you have the possibility also of using sound, and you have the possibility of using moving image, not necessarily video, but like,
Right.
playing with moving and still images. And the possibilities are so many, right? Once you're online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't. I mean, I definitely agree that that is a format that is going to come out soon. But also in terms of, I mean, artist books. So there are so many types of photo books. Artist books are just one type of photo book.
Right.
So I mean, there are some photo books that are more historical, and they will not focus so much on necessarily
The medium.
material as much as they would focus on maybe the format, the
Right.
sequence, design, and all of that would contribute to its place as a historical book versus an artistic book.
Yeah.
And
I mean, actually, one of the books that immediately comes to mind was this one book that I'd seen a couple of years ago, and I really wanted to buy it, but this was my last day in All, and I was out of money because I'd spent all of it on other books. And then I said, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to order it. And it turned out this is a book called Monsanto, and I was really impacted by it. And I came back to India and forgot about it, I think, for a couple of days. And then I said, hey, I have to go get that. And I went online and I realized it was completely sold out. And I was devastated because, I mean, it's actually I mean, for those of you who would be interested, I think it's a book you should definitely look at. It talks about how Monsanto has slowly taken over literally our complete lives through its very disturbing processes and formats, and it was a completely investigative journalistic piece, and the book was beautifully produced. And then I wrote to the author and I said, do you by any chance have even like a book that you want to just throw off? Maybe something went wrong in it, maybe there's like an ink spot and you can't sell it anyone, and I'd be so happy to take it. And he just wrote back and he said, hey, you don't have to stress so much, it's a link on my website and you can download the PDF. And it was such an interesting conversation I had, because this was a few years ago, I think about 4 5 years ago. And I'd be like, but how did you do that? And for him, the important thing was that the content of that investigative piece is actually like accessible by everyone across the world. And so for him, like, he made his limited edition book, which had its own value because the book had its own formality and tangible relevance to it. But it could, like, the content that he wanted to talk about could be accessible, could be talked about within universities, within schools, within journalistic circles. And I thought that was really, really amazing as well.
even Max Finker's books are called as PDFs on his
Yes,
website, right?
yes,
And
yes.
actually, this book Monsanto, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Sunil Shah did a talk with one of the authors yesterday.
Mhm.
Um, on, I don't know what the platform was, but he's also doing a series of photo book talks, and I think he covered
Oh,
Monsanto
cool.
yesterday.
You should
Yeah,
share
maybe I
that
can put it in. I'll just
in
share
the chat. Okay.
his Instagram handle, and then you can go there.
Yeah,
And
if you can share it in the chat section and put it to all panelists and attendees, then yeah, that'd be great.
let me double check.
Yeah, and I'm also just going to, I mean, we've been talking a bit and I know we're almost 20 minutes over. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to share the Monsanto book that I was talking about, in case any one of you might be interested. This is actually Matthew's website. So you'll be able to see that work and others by him. And of course, I would like to share the Photo Circle website as well, because I think they're doing some, like the Nepal Picture Library is doing some amazing work. And you can buy their books there as well. And hey, I just realized, Kamna, we don't have your website on the chat. Sorry, guys, we were just dumping you with a lot of that's Nepal Picture Library. I know we're giving you a lot of links and things to follow up on if you'd be interested. And I'm going to put in both your links actually, Kamna. I'm going to put in both your website and the Editions Jojo link as well. This is where you can access Kamna's work and a lot of other work that actually we have not been able to talk about right now, which is really tragic because we're running out of time. So I'm just giving you guys a massive list.
The one thing we didn't speak about, which I learned the hard way with this book, was pricing. Where
you wanna, for those of you who don't mind staying on for a little bit, maybe we can talk about that for another 5-10 minutes if you guys don't mind. And yeah.
And actually, this is something that, like getting into self-publishing, I really learned it the hard way because I had no idea how to value my book. For me, it was like, oh, if I just price it like 2 times the price of production, I'm going to make my money back. But I didn't feel like what's the word? I didn't factor the fact that I had to account for shipping, I had to account for wastage, I had to account for so many things, and basically
massive commissions, which
commissions,
book distributors end up.
All of these things, gifts to my friends, like all of these things, kind of add to the fact that you need to kind of
applications to grants for all the photographers, because that's always the big thing.
That is, and so I priced it because I wanted it to be widely accessible to everybody. Basically, in India, especially, I wanted it not to be an expensive photo book. I wanted it to be something that anybody can buy and engage with. But not necessarily a zine either. So I priced it at 1,000 rupees in India. And I realized that was a mistake because it was impractical. It was completely impractical. Right. And when I started selling it in France, actually, Clément, who runs a bookshop in Paris called Dakar Photo, he was like, no, you can't sell it for less than 30 euros because it's practical, but with shipping and everything, it's not possible. And so that kind of helped me set my price for the rest of the world. And now that I'm down the past 50 to 60 copies, I've kind of leveled that out on our website as well. So it's finally a stable price, except maybe, give or take $5 to $10, depending on how far this shipping was. But that's definitely something I've learned, that you can't really price books for less than maybe 4 or 5 times their price.
Okay. Right. That's actually really important information, because I know a lot of photographers make their books and are barely able to make their costs back. In June, as a continuation of the Guftgu series, actually, we will be doing our wrap-up week, which will be hopefully the second week, and we won't extend it longer and maybe start pacing ourselves out a little bit. We're actually going to wrap up the entire Guftgu series with a series of panel conversations discussing these other aspects, talking about the politics, the problems and the advantages in self-publishing, going to a publisher, applying to grants, applying for residencies, because I know right now we've all just been sitting, and most artists have been really concerned about how are we going to survive. And also we've been lucky enough that there's so many institutions that have opened out grants and residencies. So it'll be just nice to know what all to look out for, because like you said, sometimes you just kind of think about, we hear the word and we're like, hey, that sounds like cool, let's do it. And like a bookseller will tell you, so we'll take 30%, 40% commission, and you're like, sounds good, so I'll just make it twice the price, maybe it'll include shipping. And then suddenly you realize, no, you've got to apply for ISBN, you've got to do a whole bunch of other things. And so hopefully we can get into more details on that then as well. But thanks so much, and thank you for also addressing all these things that I know.
Thank you, Anshika. This is great.
I wish we could talk longer. I know Tamujit has said he can stay on for another hour, which would be amazing. But I think some of our other attendees we might not be able to do that. But thank you so much, Kamna. It was an amazing chat, and
Yes,
hopefully,
thank
I will
you.
see you soon, and we will sit under that tree and smoke our cigarettes.
Someday,
But
someday
until
soon.
someday soon, you know. Thank you guys for joining us in, and thank you for staying on. I know we went half an hour over, and hopefully that wasn't too much of trouble for you guys. We're gonna come back on Thursday. We have a pretty packed wrap up for May, so we're coming back on Thursday with Radha Pandey, who's going to be joining us. She's an amazing paper artist and bookmaker, and has some of the most sensitive, beautiful works I have seen, that actually deal with paper as an object itself. Um, who's also Kamna also knows
Oops.
Radha. We met her in Jaipur earlier this year. And then we're going to have Vijay Villafranca on Saturday. And on Sunday, we have Kevin Bai Lee, who's joining us from Singapore. I know Kevin was on this talk earlier, but he's probably had to head out. All talks will be at 6 p.m. and I will be sitting right here because I have nowhere else to go. But I hope to see you then. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you.